Okay, here we are, Lac sur Riez, Badger's Holt. What I'd like to do is just talk a little bit about rigs, and my emphasis is going to be on safety and understanding the rules we have here on the complex. Just to summarise, you need to look at our website, which is www.lacsurriez.com, for all the details and a lot more information. But to summarise, the really important rules we have, first and foremost, is we only allow barbless hooks. We don't allow micro-barbed hooks, and we don't allow crushed down barbed hooks anymore. They need to be proper, full barbless hooks. That's really important, and just sort of a summary of why we insist on that. Lac sur Riez in particular has quite a lot of lily pads and other snags and so on around the lake. Fish do get lost almost every week. One or two fish get lost by being, snapping up basically. Those fish are left with the hooks in them and trailing around some line and at least a hook length and hopefully an empty leg clip. But sooner or later that can catch up on something, as there's lots of things here for it to potentially hook up on or snag up on, and then we end up with a tethered fish. If we have a barbless hook, then the hook generally, probably 8 out of 10 times, will fall out really quickly and the fish will be released on its own without any mouth damage. If we have barbed hooks, as we've had in the past before we introduced barbless, the fish can be tethered and it can actually need to be released. I've released a few myself, or they rip themselves off the rigs and they damage their mouths a lot in the process, or worst cases they can die like that. So there's a good reason behind the barbless hook rule. The second rule, or second really important thing for us, is no leaders at all. When we say no leaders, we mean no leaders of any type. That means anything like a safe zone leader, whatever it's called, even if it's called safe zone, for my reasoning here on Lac sur Riez, we don't want it being used. Also casting leaders, some people want sort of the first 10 yards or something, a very thick line, and there'll be a knot somewhere between that and the main line. We don't allow that either. Reason for not allowing that is the worst case is here, somebody gets a fish snagged and snaps up. The weakest part of any setup typically would be the knot between the main line and the leader, if you were to use one. If that knot snaps, the fish is left trailing a hook length and the length of the leader, whatever that might be. If you don't have a leader, the weakest part of the rig is the knot between the main line and the leg clip swivel. When it snaps, if it snaps there, the fish is left just trailing a hook length and hopefully an empty leg clip. There's a lot less chance of just a 6, 8, 10 inch hook length snagging on something than there is in a metre, or can be up to 10 metres if it's a shock type leader. A long leader has a lot more chance of snagging up on something, so there's good logic behind that one as well. You don't need leaders here anyway, because you don't need to cast very long range. You can use bait boats and rowing boats, and if you do get fish stuck in pads and snags, you can go out to them in the boat and you can get them anyway, land them that way. So there is really not a big advantage in having a leader in the first place. The third most important rule we have here is whatever setup you use, and there's quite a few you can use, the lead must release itself if it gets snagged. If the lead jams up, for example, between two pieces of lily stem split like this, and you can get a V, or a tree branch splits like that under the water, the lead gets jammed in that V. At that moment, it must eject itself. It must be able to come off the setup. We don't insist that you drop the lead on every fish. That's optional. We don't mind if you drop the lead on every fish, it's fine. I do drop the lead quite a lot because I use MCF clips, and I tend to find that I land a lot more fish that way. That's optional, but the rule is if the lead snags, it must come off. So here we are, Lac sur Riez. Just wanted to perhaps give you a little example why we have some of the rules we have. We do have quite a lot of rules that are designed at making sure the fish can get off a rig if it's been if a fish has snapped you off in the snags and pads and so on sur Riez. That's why we have the no leaders rule and the barbless hook rule, and you must release the leads rule and so on. And this is a good example of why. We have lots of lily pads on Lac sur Riez, and they look beautiful in the summer, and you see carp swimming around them and in them, and they're lovely. But underneath that lovely stuff you see on the surface is an absolute mass of this stuff. Now this is actually quite a small one. Some of them are thicker than your arm, the ones right near to the bottom. Now if you had to design the perfect snag, if you were a carp and you wanted to design a snag that you could get yourself hooked up on and stop somebody landing you, you'd probably design these lily pads. They're absolutely you know, outrageous as a snag really. Underneath the water is meters and meters of this stuff, and it's not straight. It runs along the bottom, loops up, splits. You know, you've got lots of V's in it as well, which is perfect for a lead to get stuck in. You know, if a fish gets into these, you will lose it. I'm absolutely guaranteeing you. But in the process of losing it, you're likely to rip its mouth. You know, we do see that on here. And our rules are not designed to be difficult for you for fishing or make your life difficult. They're designed to protect the fish for things like this. Okay, so we talk about, there's a couple of setups that I personally would recommend, which would help you to kind of comply with all of those rules and will catch you a ton of fish. My own preferred setup, which I use for 95% of all my fishing, have done for years and years, is an MCF leg clip. The MCF leg clip is brilliant because it releases the lead pretty well every single time you want it to. In fact, I can't remember the time it hasn't, but it doesn't generally release the lead when you don't want it to. It's foolproof, it's easy to set up, there's nothing to go wrong. It's about as safe as you can possibly have for a leg clip system. If you are using an MCF leg clip, then what we ask for as well is that you put a length of tubing behind the leg clip, at least 50 centimetres we say, but that tubing can be any tubing you like. I personally like tungsten kind of heavy tubing, but it doesn't really matter as long as it's some kind of tubing. There's a reason behind that. It's not for anti-tangle like it used to be in the old days for casting. It's to protect the sides of the fish whilst you're playing the fish. A thin monofilament line can lift scales off fish if it's a long fight and the fish keeps swimming away from you with the line going down one of the left or the right flanks. So please use a bit of tubing behind the MCF leg clip. The second type of setup I don't use myself, but I recommend, it's fine, a lot of people do use it, is a normal conventional leg clip. I don't normally say the tackle manufacturers' brand names because I remain very neutral in my fishing, but the one I recommend if you are going to use a normal leg clip is a Nash Weed safety clip. I have nothing to do with Nash, but I just think it's a very safe clip. The reason being is the tail rubber on that Weed safety clip is very short and it's very stubby, and it's a steep angle the way that it goes up onto the main part of the clip. And for that reason, no matter how hard you try and put it on, it can't be overdone, it can't be put on too tightly. It will drop the lead almost as effectively as an MCF. I have to say though, it's not quite as effective as an MCF in my opinion. That covers the two types of clip I would recommend. If you are using any type of leg clip at all, always two things you need to think about. Most people know this, but just to be sure, basically spit on and wet the tail rubber of the clip before you put it onto the clip so that it goes on wet and not dry, and only put it on really a fraction of the way. Most leg clips, not the Nash Weed ones, but the normal leg clips, they actually allow you to put the tail rubber on far too tightly, in my opinion. I have recovered rigs from the lake where I could hardly pull the lead off myself, you know, using my hands and gripping it and pulling it hard. There's no way a fish would be able to do that. So put the tail rubber on very, very lightly and wet it before you do it. A little tip, you don't have to do it, but I have done it in the past. If you want the lead to come off even easier if it gets snagged, cut the little spigot down a little bit, say about a third or a half the spigot, cut it off, the spigot that the swivel of the leg goes onto. You'll find it comes off even easier that way. Okay, so that's the kind of leg clip type fishing. Another kind of setup that some people use, I personally never use it on Syria because it's a silty lake and I don't like them in silt, but inline lead setup, some people love them. I'm not against them, I just personally don't use them in silt. I don't use them in silt because they tend to nosedive into the silt and they take half the hook length in with them, whereas a leg clip leaves the hook length on the top of the silt. If you are going to use an inline lead, the only way we allow an inline lead to be used is by fishing it what I call drop-off style. That means the line does not go through the centre of the lead, it goes around the outside of the lead. So there's a tail rubber on the back, the line comes out of that tail rubber around the side of the lead and onto the eye of a swivel on the front. And it's the same eye that the hook length swivel or quick link attachment comes off as well, and the main part of the swivel goes into the bottom of the lead. In that way, when the line tightens with the fish on, because of a little bit of stretching the line, the tail rubber comes off and the lead just falls off the swivel at the front. It's super safe again if it's set up correctly. If you do that, a tip is to cut the back ring of the swivel off with a pair of wire cutter type pliers, or squeeze the back ring of the swivel down so it's kind of oval shape and not round. That way it doesn't get stuck in the back, in the nose of the lead, and it comes off a lot easier. I personally would do that myself if ever I use that setup. The last kind of setup I personally wouldn't use, again on Siriair, but some people do like to use it because they're worried about the silt, is a helicopter type setup. Now if you're going to use a helicopter setup, it has to be absolutely 100%, it has to be fished in what I call a naked helicopter style. That means no leader, once again. The main line has to go all the way through to the lead at the end, and the hook length on a ring swivel has to come off that main line, has to be running up and down on that main line. Now the lead must be able to be ejected from the end if it gets snagged, so we recommend, and we have here on site if anybody needs them, the Korda HeliSafe system. Again, I'm nothing to do with Korda, but it's a good system, I like it. The lead will come off when you're playing a fish every time. There are other ways of doing it. There's some old-fashioned, old-school ways of doing it with PVA and so on. I won't go into that here, but if anyone wants to talk about that, I'm always around, and I'm happy to help on that. The other thing with the helicopter type setup is if you're playing very big fish, and we're talking here, you know, potential for fish to 70, even 80 pounds, for a long protracted fight, the ring swivel can be putting a lot of pressure on the main line, kind of cutting through it at 90 degrees. There is a product, again from Korda, it's called a line protector bead. It's a tapered bead that sits above the lead, and the ring swivel will slide down onto that tapered line protector bead, and it protects the main line from being kind of cut through by the ring swivel whilst you're playing the fish. On a water with smaller fish, I wouldn't worry about it, but on a water like this where you might have a really, really big fish and a very heavy, long fight, I would recommend personally to use that, and I would certainly use it myself if I was going to use a helicopter setup. The last thing with a helicopter setup is the top bead is where most people go wrong. That's the bead that stops the hook length sliding all the way up the main line. The only type of bead that I would use myself, and the only type of bead that we allow people to use on here is, again, it's a Korda product, it's called a no trace bead. And basically it's a little piece that sits, it slides onto the main line, it grips the main line really tightly, and it's tapered, and the no trace bead sits on that little piece of kind of rubber, and it has a slot in the side of the bead. Now, if the hook length slides up, it contacts the bead, it slides up the taper of the piece that's on the line, it contacts the bead, it pushes the bead up off the top of that kind of rubber stopper, and because there's a slot in the bead falls off. Then the hook length is free to just slide up the main line, and it's as safe as you can ever make a helicopter rig. Just one thing to be really careful with, I've seen this done wrong several times already here. These Korda no trace beads, they're tapered. The taper must face the lead direction. It must be pointing downwards as you hold the rod, you know, with the lead hanging. It will not work the other way around. It's designed that the ring swivel has to slide up the taper till it hits the bead, and then the bead comes off. Also, the helicopter system is the only setup we allow people to use without needing the tubing. We're trying to be as sort of friendly as possible here to make it less complicated for people. I'm not a fan of it, but you can use a helicopter without the tubing because it makes it a lot easier to use. Again, with all of these things, please come and find me. I'm always here, I'm at the house, I'm happy to advise. I've spent 30 odd years tying rigs. I'm more than happy to tell you what I personally think of a particular setup, and I can help you if you need advice on it. Lastly, and we're not picking on anyone here, we do it with everybody who fishes the complex. We have had problems before with tethered fish. These fish are big, they're valuable, they've taken years to get to these weights. We want to maintain them in a good condition. So we will be doing random rig checks on you whilst you're here. That means we'll come at some time, anytime, and we'll ask to wind in 1 or 2 rods, and we will be checking the rigs. Please make sure that you know the rules. Please look at the website, read all of it. I've only summarised things here. Please don't get caught out with that. We will be checking. Okay, thank you.